In this video, let's explore how the Nazis succeeded in their elections to become the biggest party in the Weimar Republic. So, how did they succeed? The simple answer would be the Depression. Without the Great Depression, the Nazi Party probably wouldn't have risen to power. So that probably is the biggest factor. But there are 6 other factors that allow the Nazis to seize this opportunity. So let's get into them. Number 1, Nazi campaigning. It was very modern and effective. Their biggest campaigning asset was Hitler, a very powerful speaker. And by 1932, the elections in 1932, the Nazis were the single biggest party. So in the same year, Hitler ran for president. Unfortunately, he didn't manage to become one, but his campaign raised his profile hugely. He used modern technology, such as films, radios, and records and radios, to bring his message to millions of people. He appeared as a leader of a modern party with modern ideas. Nazis relied on generalized slogans. Slogans like uniting the people, going back to traditional values, and it didn't really specify what this meant in terms of their policy, so what they were going to do once they got into power. So that made it hard to criticize. And when they were criticized, so for example, they were criticized by the industrialists, they expressed concerns about Nazi plans to nationalize the industry, they simply just dropped the policy. They wanted to get support from as many people as possible. And they backed up their campaign with action. Soup kitchens, basically free food, and hostels for the unemployed. They used negative cohesion. So the negative cohesion, this is super important because it lays the basis for all the other remaining factors. So negative cohesion. People didn't really support the Nazis because they shared Nazi views. That's positive cohesion, having the same beliefs. Cohesion basically means bringing people together, but rather because they shared Nazi fears. If you hate what I hate, then I'll support you. Kind of like the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? So if you hate what I hate, then I'll support you. That's negative cohesion. So negative, people that hate the same things, and cohesion, people brought together. So negative cohesion, people that hated the same things were brought together, not because they necessarily supported the Nazi ideology. So who did both the Nazis and the Germans hate then? The disillusionment with democracy. Remember, disappointment. Disillusionment means disappointment. If you watch the previous videos, you'll know that. And it means when something is not as good as thought. So the biggest negative cohesion could have been the disappointment with democracy in the Weimar Republic. People were disappointed with democracy. Politicians were unable to tackle the problems of the Depression. When the Depression began to bite, Chancellor Bernig actually cut government spending and welfare benefits. He urged Germans to make sacrifices. Brüning made a disastrous decision, calling for new elections in 1930, and this gave the Nazis an opportunity to exploit the discontent in Germany. The unemployment was almost 6 million, and the average income fell by 40% since 1929. So once the Great Depression happened, the income fell by 40%. Negative cohesion of all those disappointed by Weimar's democracy, right? Decadence. So moral or cultural decline due to excessive indulgence in pleasure, such as prostitution or drug dealing. So the nightclubs on the picture on the left you could see here. Nazis could count on all those that felt the traditional German values were under threat. The Nazis talked about restoring these old-fashioned values. So especially the people in rural areas, like the elderly in the rural countryside, they really hated this decadence, right? Negative cohesion of all those that hated the Weimar culture. They would support the Nazis because they hated the same things. Negative cohesion. The communist threat. As this crisis deepened, support for the extremist parties increased, including the communists, because the socialists who were running the government at the time, they weren't really fixing the problems. So they wanted radical solutions, so they would support the extremists, the communists and the Nazis. Nazis turned this to their advantage, and the fear of communism was yet another shared fear, a negative cohesion in action yet again. There were frequent battles between communist gangs and the police, so they would be very violent with the police. So in contrast, the SA and the SS gave an impression of discipline and order. Now if you watch the previous videos you'll know, but just in case you forgot, the SS were part of the SA, so the members of the SA that were fanatically loyal, extremely loyal to Hitler, were moved to the SS. So these SS are very loyal to Hitler. Business owners feared communists due to their plans to introduce state control of businesses. So business owners, they would want money, right? They're rich. They have their own businesses. They wouldn't want their business to get owned by the government. So they thought the Nazis would combat the threat. So some began to put money into the Nazi campaign funds. So negative cohesion in action again. The people who hate the communists, well, the only people who really hated them were the Nazis. So you'd support the Nazis. Farmers were also fearful. So in the USSR, which had a communist uprising at the time, the communist government had taken over all land, and in doing so, millions of peasant farmers were killed and imprisoned in the process. So the Nazis promised to help these poor farmers. Weak opposition. The Social Democratic Party, remember this party? It was the party that Ebert was in when he founded the Weimar Republic. They made a grave mistake in thinking that the German people wouldn't fall for these vague promises and accusations. They also failed to work with other parties, in particular the communists, because they were also gaining popularity. But Ebert's crushing of the communists in 1919 to 20. Remember when Ebert first came to power and made the Weimar Republic, there was lots of uprisings from the nationalists, the Freikorps, and the communists, the Spartacists. They left too many bitter memories of being crushed by these Ebert's army forces in part of the socialist group. So the Nazis were able to exploit the divisions among their opponents. Now watch the previous videos if you haven't, because it really provides important context. Now the bigger picture. The modern and effective Nazi campaigning, combined with Hitler's excellent speaking skills, got the public's attention. And then negative cohesion pretty much did all the rest. Germans didn't necessarily support Nazis' views and ideology, but they did hate the same things. So many Germans were disappointed with the Weimar government's handling of the Depression. They really had two choices. You could either support the communists and the Nazis. The communists and Nazis, they were both radical. They promised to do radical and extreme changes that could fix the economic struggles at the time. But many people really didn't like the communist policies, right? So people who didn't like the communist policies, they would support the Nazis instead. Don't like the decadence of Weimar culture? The Nazis. And for the rest of the Germans, they could either continue supporting the socialists, but the future wasn't really looking bright, right? So why not support the radical Nazis? Things can't get any worse, right? The Nazis had vague policies. They didn't really specify what they wanted to do, so they really didn't really have any specific targeted hate against them, because they didn't really have anything to hate about. So you'd support the Nazis, and things can't get worse, right? Nazi support skyrocketed. Middle-class Germans, many Germans, especially the middle class, supported Hitler. All across Germany, in towns, countryside, everywhere, many supported the Nazis. In rural communities, the Nazis got support from those who didn't like the decadent Weimar culture. And if you look at the graph over here, in 1933 is when Hitler basically takes over, and basically becomes the what's the name? Chancellor. He becomes the Chancellor in 1933, like January or something. We will cover this in the next video. But you see, in the years leading up to that, they were the single biggest party. The NSDAP, that's the Nazis. They were the single biggest party. And the SPD, the socialists, they were declining. The communists weren't doing so well either, but you can see it's a huge gap and difference between the Nazis and all the other parties. So, in the next video, we'll look at how Hitler becomes the Chancellor of Germany and how he consolidates his power to get rid of all his opposition and to become the Führer of the Weimar Republic, Germany now, by 1934. Thanks for watching this video of Stu Plain. Please like and subscribe and share with your friends if it helped you.